Hey there. It's John Dickinson. It's Greg Silver. It's Just Dubs. It's JD here for KMBR, the sports leader, recording another episode. What is this episode? I've lost count. It really doesn't matter. 3, I guess.
Greg, 3 for the offseason.
Greg, what's going on, my man? Yeah, 3 for the offseason. As the playoffs roll on, we're in the conference finals stage of the playoffs with the Celtics and the Pacers, the Timberwolves and the Mavs going at it, but kind of a heavier Warriors news week, Greg, over the last week. It's been pretty dormant the last few weeks, I think, since the exit interviews and the first couple of rounds of the playoffs taking center stage, but the Warriors back more in the news cycle over the last week, from Steve Kerr to Draymond Green to conversations about potential targets as we get now within a little over a month toward free agency and the NBA offseason truly going to begin here in roughly a month when the finals and everything are done with the draft. I think we're, a month away basically from the draft at this point, a month on Sunday, June 26th and now 27th. So the Warriors are finding themselves, Greg, back in the news. So good to be with you, my friend, here as we record this on Friday afternoon.
Yeah, I'm always glad we can squeeze these episodes in because this is a really eventful week where there's some good discussions to be had for sure. I mean, Draymond Green, yes, coach. Steve Kerr with a great interview with Raj Mathai, talked about his future and some of the young players and kind of getting into a lot of that. Then we also have congratulations to Steph Curry becoming just one of 4 active players to get his 10th All-NBA selection with number 10 in 15 years. So that's pretty incredible on his part. And Brandon Podziemski, the rookie, All-NBA first-team rookie as the 19th pick. So the Warriors season did not have as many bright spots as a lot of people in the Bay Area hoped come the start of the season last year, but Brandon Podziemski certainly was a pleasant surprise, and I'm glad that he is likely here to stay.
Yeah, and Pods on with Murph and Marcus on Friday morning on the Sports Leader, ending, I think, a lengthy press junket. It was a lengthy week-long press junket where the Warriors, I think, put him on every show and that he possibly could be. And I think we caught him right at the end of that. But, yeah, Pods with a lot of really good things to say. Optimistic Pods as far as the ability for the Warriors to get back to contention and optimistic on the younger players that the Warriors counted on so much in this 2023 season or 23-24 season. And we'll figure to count on a number of them, if not all of them, moving forward in 2024-25. Let's start, and we'll go back with and kind of work our way forward here from the night, I think, of our last recording last week, the interview that Steve Kerr did with Raj Mathai of NBC Sports here in the Bay Area, and you know, a lot of good things to come out of it. Insightful stuff. The lens behind that interview, obviously, being the Olympics coming up and all of that, and NBC owning the Olympics and getting an opportunity to talk with the men's national team head coach in Steve Kerr here with the Olympics a couple of months away. So yeah, coming out of this, I mean, the discussion about coaching shelf life and how he foresees an amicable parting of the ways, Coach Kerr does with the Warriors, though also indicating the 2-year contract extension would also indicate this, that he just signed, not time yet. And I think that the balance here and my big 2 takeaways that we can get into, it's really the balance between where are the Warriors going to go with these next 2 years? Because I think at times when you hear Steve discuss the next 2 years and you look at the young players on the roster and you look at the veteran players on the roster, primarily Steph Curry and Draymond Green, and then Steve being re-signed. And I think the one thing that most Warrior fans don't want to hear is the notion that that it's almost going to be a 2-year farewell and mediocrity tour. While the young players are figuring it out, but aren't going to be great enough to be carriers, and the old guys are going to ride off with dignity, while this team wins 40 to 45 games every year and ends up being anywhere between the 7th and 12th seeds in the Western Conference. So I think we know it's going to be amicable. I think, though, there are a lot of Warrior fans, Greg, that are thinking, well, if this team's not going to do anything dramatic to make an attempt to contend in the next couple of years, then why not go all in on development at that point? And so there's just the mixed signals that I don't necessarily love that I think continue to permeate from the organization. I'm not singling out Steve specifically, but it's like they got to pick a direction and they got to go in that direction, whatever it is. And the clock is ticking here with a month until the NBA offseason.
They surely do have to pick a direction. And when you couple everything you just said with one of the many Draymond Green clips on the podcast he was on with Shaq recently, where he talked about how he doesn't want to leave his guys. He'd rather miss the playoffs 5 years in a row and fight with them than just go somewhere else.
Can you imagine that, though? Can you imagine Draymond? Because here's the reality on Draymond. Like, Draymond has not handled the Warriors sucking very well in the time in which the Warriors have sucked. In individual points in seasons, the 1920 season, which ended with the pandemic. It's been well noted how he struggles at times to play in games where Steph isn't playing. All of the odd, 4, 5, 6 times where he's been ejected in games that Steph just is somehow missing. Like, I laughed out loud when I heard Draymond, say that, because I'm thinking, wow, really? Like, Draymond is not good at handling losing if losing is going to come with regularity, and it really hasn't come with any semblance of regularity other than that one pandemic shortened year. And he didn't really handle that year all that well. It wasn't the beginning of this past year, but he didn't handle that year all that well.
No, he had a clip from that year too, or I think it was maybe a couple years after the fact when they had traded for Wiggins and Steph and Clay were on their way back. And he had said, yeah, I definitely thought the run was over at times, not because I didn't think we could compete, but because just getting up for big games was hard when you're not competing at a high level. So, that was an interesting clip to me too, but kind of pivoting it back to the Kerr discussion and if they got to pick a direction. I mean, you can certainly see it that way, but I also think that when you look at the standards of a Joe Lacob and a Mike Dunleavy Jr. or previously Bob Myers, and then you also factor in the competitiveness of those Hall of Famers between Steve Kerr, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, I don't think they're going to be okay with a farewell mediocrity tour. And maybe you got to have a little bit of a healthy kind of delusion to think that you did win 46 games. You were an above average team the second half of the year, and you can make some tweaks to make you a competitive team. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but I think you got to at least believe and be competitive enough to know, like, hey, we are going against the ticking clock, and they got to have some kind of realistic perspective on it. One thing I did like about the interview is I thought it actually was pretty realistic and seemed like it came from the heart, like it usually is with Kerr. It wasn't a whole lot of PR fabricated answers. That's not taking a shot at the Warriors PR department, who is awesome. I just mean your stereotypical kind of PR, this is what they tell you to say answer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just, I do think that there has to be a direction that everybody knows, once you hit media day and training camp starts at the end of September and early October. And look, we'll know well before then because of the offseason, which is forthcoming here in the next, 4 to 6 weeks. We'll get a lot of the answers as to whether the Warriors are looking to go big and do something dramatic and add that number 2 player alongside Steph Curry in addition to other complementary players that will need to be added, and also while keeping some of the young core to be role players who continue to develop. The young players, though, were the other interesting part of the interview, because Steve Kerr flat out in what I think was pretty candid. And I know this was another thing that kind of got bookmarked and Warrior fans didn't necessarily love, which was, him understanding and acknowledging the fact that at times it's difficult communicating with the younger players on this roster, which I think makes everybody just think of the individual issues that a number of the Warrior young players have had, whether it's been, the well-chronicled ones with Jonathan Kuminga, and to, what is going on with Moses Moody and why can't he get consistent run, to, why wasn't Trace Jackson Davis even playing more in the first half of the season when you look at how successful he was in the second half. I mean, really, Brandon Podziemski is the only guy who was able to penetrate the trust of Steve Kerr without having to go through some growing pains. And even that, I think, has drawn at times the ire of the Warrior fan base and some in the media, because it's as if, you're giving one guy the reign. Why aren't you're one guy the freedom to go out there and make mistakes and learn and grow? Why not these other three guys, at least at that same level? So I thought the honesty there, while appreciated, didn't necessarily do Steve any favors in terms of the perception of, why maybe some of these younger players, Kuminga and Moody specifically, aren't farther along in terms of their development.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was kind of a two-sided argument last year when Kuminga started getting more run and having a stretch of a couple of months where he was playing really good basketball, which is, did it benefit to kind of go head-to-head with Steve Kerr? And maybe Kerr kind of got to tell him more honestly, look, I'm not going to give you a lot of minutes unless you can do these XYZ little things, which he started doing more. And I think he had a couple of quotes that showed an understanding there. Then there was also the side of the argument that was, look, if you played the kid earlier, he might have been able to figure out these mistakes and play through them better. And I think there's fairness to both sides on that one. And yeah, I mean, it always is going to be challenged with new players when you have sustained greatness in any sport, I think, but especially in the NBA. I mean, if you look at like the 90s Bulls, for example, say they had kept it together past 1998, but you still had Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Like, do you think Michael Jordan would have had an easy time dealing with all these rookies coming in and having to play through mistakes while you're trying to compete at the highest level? And I'm not saying that they didn't need the young players, because they absolutely did this last year. That was kind of the thing that they had to come to an honest realization with, and what kind of helped turn their season around. So it's not that the young players weren't important. They were extremely important. But if you're going to play in a system and a kind of very high IQ style of basketball that people like Draymond and Steph and, previously Andre Iguodala and Sean Livingston and, of course, Clay and in Looney in a lot of ways have played, there can be a lower level of patience. And you even saw it at certain times with, like, early in the season, Draymond suspended, and you saw Steph like kicking chairs because they couldn't get defensive stops down the stretch against some teams. So I think that's kind of just the nature of having aging legends and aging stars. I mean, I think that's part of it, honestly.
It is part of it, but it all still comes back to me to where you have to decide, like, the young players can be role players and Kuminga can be a starter, and like you have to make decisions on each of these guys, but you also have to improve the roster. And to me, it's not only you have to pick a lane and a direction, but you also have to acknowledge that the answer to that really is you have to go for it with Steph. And look, I don't want to turn that comment into, well, maybe you have to get rid of some of the young guys to become more veteran or to get that second best player, because we've had that conversation. We're going to continue to have that conversation. But what I am getting at is, regardless of whether you do that or not, like, Jonathan Kuminga has to have a specific role next year. And I'll say it, like, John, let's just assume that they're all four on the team. Kuminga, Moody, Podziemski, and Trayce Jackson-Davis. The Warriors have to me, the simple answer is improve from the outside. And if you're assuming that those four players are going to be on the roster, they all have to have defined roles. And Kuminga's role is going to be as a 4, not a 3. Like, I think we know the answers to some of that. Podziemski, could he be the starting 2? I think he might be the starting 2, depending upon what happens with Klay Thompson, or if the Warriors go out and add maybe somebody else who can be a bench scorer if Klay Thompson winds up leaving. And there's been, another report, looks like maybe Philly's in the mix on Klay Thompson. But what I'm getting at is it all has to fit. Like, you have to pick the direction of, because here's the thing, you're not with Steph Curry and Steve Kerr and Draymond Green going to make the decision that you're just comfortable developing the four players that we just mentioned while being mediocre. Like, that's just like, it's not even like, that shouldn't even for a second be the option. But that doesn't mean that you're stunting the development of those young players. The players that you acquire from the outside have to blend with the players that you are going to keep on the roster, whoever those players are, even if all four of them wind up staying on this Warriors roster. If you go get another center and Trayce Jackson-Davis is still on the team, then the two centers you have better like TJD and whoever you get better complement each other on the roster in a top 10. If you go get a guy who's going to be a number one scorer off the bench, or you keep Klay Thompson for that role, then it better fit with Brandon Podziemski. If Kuminga's destined to play the 4, which I think unequivocally is his best chance at being successful and continuing to grow, then you better go get a 3 that will complement. If it's not going to be Andrew Wiggins, it better complement Jonathan Kuminga at the 4, or as a backup 4 who's still going to play 25 to 30 minutes in every single game. All of these things, Moses Moody needs to be part of a rotate. I think he's easier to fit in theory, within, but it all has to fit is my point. It can't be development on one side and Steph and Draymond are still here and we went and got these guys, but now, we got Jarrett Allen, which means TJD can't play, more than 15 minutes a game or whatever. Like, it just like that, like it has to make some semblance of logical sense next year, in addition to pick a direction.
Well, I mean, just look at this year. I think that they kind of were always in need of a second star, but when they had the 27-12, yeah, sure, some of that was beating up on some bad teams and everything, but it was like finally reaching a point where people were comfortable with their role on the team for this team. But then that even changed when Kuminga went out and Trayce Jackson-Davis was getting starting minutes and everything. So, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head there. Like, you can look at a team like the Dallas Mavericks, for example, that had Luka and Kyrie for the second half of last year, and they kind of just tanked to the end and got the lottery, and then they made some trades this year, and they still got Luka and Kyrie, but guys like Derek Lively and Gafford are a perfect fit, and it complements those two superstar guards as well. So, I mean, that's just one kind of example, but yeah, I'm with you. It does have to fit, and people have to know their roles from day one and not game 33.
Well, and you said this in preparation for this recording, and in looking at the Western and Eastern Conference Finals right now. Dallas went out and did the thing at the deadline and got PJ Washington and got Gafford, and they were willing to take a chance on Kyrie going back a year, and Kyrie was basically worthless last year. But they got him back and committed to giving a damn about playing NBA basketball for this year. And he's thrived as that number 2 option. And he's been terrific when he's been a number 2 option throughout the course of his career when he's been, motivated and engaged to play. So I think the Mavericks are interesting. And I know Indiana is also in that because they went and got Siakam, which I think changed some things for them, which made them more playoff ready. They had a way they were getting it done in the regular season, which I think could have continued to be successful. But if you were going to win a playoff series and they've won 2, you were going to have to go get somebody like Pascal Siakam,
who's been awesome, by the way,
who's been awesome. So the point I'm getting at is, and I'll relate it back to the Warriors in this sense too. Dallas was the 11 seed in the Western Conference last year. They didn't even make the play-in tournament intentionally. They tanked it. They tanked it, and they ended up getting lively basically because of it. So they tanked it, and they were the 11, and now they're in the conference finals. The Pacers were, I don't remember what they were. Were they 10 or 11? Did they even make the play-in tournament last year? I wanted to say that maybe they did.
No. Halliburton got hurt like post All-Star break, and then they kind of skid.
Yeah. So they went from out, and the East is a little different, but they went from out to now in the conference finals. So you can make significant jumps, but I think the Dallas point is telling because Dallas has had Luka, and when it was Luka and Brunson, they had action. When it became Luka and you didn't have Kyrie yet, or Luka and Kyrie wasn't engaged yet, like it just, you weren't even in the top 10. So what Dallas did, Dallas went and got the number 2, and Dallas went and got 2 role players that knocked everybody else down a peg, and it all complemented each other. And now they're like, Dallas in some ways went and got their 2 and their 3 in PJ Washington, and became this 2-headed center monster with Gafford and Lively, which is, been able to flip their defense from among the league's worst to among the league's best over the last couple of months of the season. So it can change fast, but if you're going to go from 11th to 2nd or 4th or whatever range you see Dallas in, obviously they're in the final 2 in the West, but let's just say top 4. If you want to do that, then it's 2 or 3 players, not just the one player, but it can be done. So I think the Dallas template, and look, Dallas took a risk on Kyrie Irving. They brought him in. He wasn't really into it. They paid him, but they paid him with the thought of, hey, dude, we need you to be this guy. And for this year, he's been this guy. So again, identify those improvements. If you're the Warriors, go get those. But it's got to be somebody that's stock is down that the Warriors look to go get and they invest in, and it's going to be risky. And if it's risky, you're going to have to bet that you're going to wind up in a similar way than they did with Wiggins. But I think even more, like they're looking for somebody better than Wiggins was 2 years ago, which is kind of crazy to say because Wiggins was really good.
Yeah, I mean, and then if they don't have Wiggins, they have to absolutely have a 3 of some sort, because as much as I do think Moses Moody deserves a real role on the team this next year, he's probably not your real 3 that you're going to rely on there. So that's a whole other can of worms that we've opened. And I don't even want to necessarily shut the door on this discussion, because I think there's a lot of great stuff here and we're probably going to keep revisiting it. But we also have a whole book, a fat encyclopedia of notes that I think is too good to not get to in this episode. So what do you say we do a little quick tidbit on, we talk about Steve Kerr and his future as the coach. Well, Draymond, being Draymond, on a podcast shared a discussion that he had with Joe Lacob about maybe coach Draymond Green post Steve Kerr.
Yeah. I mean, how can you not laugh? I mean, could you imagine? You imagine Draymond as a head coach? I mean, he certainly has the intelligence to do it. He certainly has the acumen and ability to analyze and, manage a game in real time component to it. But I mean, my goodness. And I think guys would want to play for him. I think he'd be an unbelievable motivator, at least on the surface. But I don't know. I don't see Draymond Green as I see Draymond Green as a broadcaster more than I see Draymond Green as a coach. I think part of it is, great players, I think at times have trouble relaying their message to guys and having them be able to live up to the standard.
You're going right down the road I was going.
And like Draymond, I mean, Draymond was a guy who wasn't a star. And so, but became one by doing all the little things and being super intelligent and high motor and just an absolute dog on the floor in the best way. And so I think he's even, I would think it would be tougher for Draymond to accept lesser players, let alone the star players, but lesser players that aren't willing to necessarily bring it at the level that he's brought it to get himself to that point where he became a star player.
I don't think that Draymond Green as a head coach in the NBA is something that wouldn't necessarily work because of his incredible basketball mind and his passion and the ability to motivate. But I think you're hitting the nail right on the head there when you talk about some of the greater players that this game has ever seen or greater winners. Sometimes the drive and the passion is so much that it can make one key bullet point on an NBA coaching job description really hard, and that's personality and ego management. And I think that's why you see a lot of role players previously in the NBA, like an Ime Udoka or a Steve Kerr, have a lot of ability to relate to players because they're not someone that hasn't been around the game of basketball or seen it played at a high level, but they also weren't the driving force who had to have this insane energy and passion and heartbeat every single night. And that doesn't mean great players can't be great coaches. I mean, Larry Bird had 3 years with the Pacers and he was a coach of the year and they went to a finals. So it's not like it's something that couldn't work, but I do think that Draymond would be a really entertaining coach on a winning team. I don't know how things would go in terms of crisis management, egos clashing, contract disputes, and a lot of other things that coaches kind of have to deal with a lot more frequently than we see in the public eye.
And I also think, Draymond, even though he does have a temper and sometimes that can get in the way of different things, when he's removed from that and calms down, he does have the understanding of everybody's perspective, which I think gives him a chance, right? Like I think he understands the business side of it. I think he understands the on-court side of it. I think he understands when guys are maybe not don't have the right intentions as far as what they're maybe bringing to the table versus what they want for the future of their career. So I think Draymond understands it all. It would just be a composure thing in terms of running a little hot. And I mean day to day. I don't mean, the obvious mixing it up with the officials in game or maybe mixing it up with a player or something like that in game. It's just keeping that composure to allow the intelligence and the basketball acumen and all of that to ring true. His appearance on the Point Game podcast, Draymond revealed that Joe Lacob, the owner of the Warriors, told Draymond that he could see him taking over for Steve Kerr if and when Steve Kerr was ready to to step down. Now that's the part where I think it becomes a bridge too far. Thinking that like Draymond's going to be coaching the Warriors in 2026 or 27. I think, he's still got 3 more years, right? So he's got 25, 26. So
yeah, he'll just be a player coach, Bill Russell.
Thinking that Draymond Green would be the head coach of the Warriors, we'll give him that final playing year, because I don't think you'd give up that money in 2027. In 2020, I mean, that is so not far away at this point.
You said you see Draymond as more of a broadcaster, which I absolutely agree with. I also see him as more of a GM than a head coach.
He's doing the conference final. Like, he already is a broadcaster.
Yeah, he is. He's more of a broadcaster than I am right here in my nice little comfy chair. But I also see him as more of a GM than a coach, to be honest. Like, roster construction, a little behind the scenes. Going back to your point, maybe a little bit more removed from some of the heated exchanges at times to kind of sit back and hold everyone's perspective in a more accurate way. I mean, I don't know. I think he could be a pretty solid GM.
Totally. I think in some ways you'd be selling his actual day-to-day basketball IQ short. Not that he couldn't have an impact on that, but I feel like he's just so smart at analyzing every aspect of the game. I think we're all better off if he ends up being a broadcaster, like a full-time broadcaster when he hangs it up. I think we're better for that, because the one thing that we don't get a lot of, and I know some of how he's made his name is the ability to be unfiltered and say what's on his mind, even about players that he's competing with in the league still. But to me, it's more the genuine X's and O's. This is what's going on a particular play. This is why this worked. This is why that didn't work. Like, we just don't get enough of that from people that matter. I feel like in the day-to-day in NBA coverage, we get a lot of the bullshit. Oh, am I allowed to say that? Oh, yeah. We'll have to bleep that out. Yeah. We get a lot of we get a lot of the BS, and we don't get enough of the substance. And I think Draymond, as much as he's known for the things that have gotten him in trouble, I think the best part of Draymond as he gets older and phases out of the game from a player standpoint and in a few years into whatever's next, broadcasting, I just think his ability to analyze the game is really up there with the all-time ability to analyze the game. So I hope we all are, from a selfish standpoint, I hope we're all able to get that Draymond to where he's just able to kind of break everything down and not be one team centric or working for a team and everything's proprietary and he can't fully share it.
I'm not surprised that Draymond's a polarizing figure as a broadcaster throughout these playoffs, because people have very strong opinions about him as a player, but I'm with you in that I really like having Draymond as a broadcaster. I think the unfilteredness actually does not come off as super reckless to me. I think it's kind of Barkley-esque of just like, I don't really care how people are going to perceive this. This is just how I see it. And I think he does more of that X's and O's and matchup specific stuff than someone like a Charles Barkley. So, I think that he'll be good for the game, and we don't know what's going to happen with the TNT crew. So if we can get something with people that are trusted and entertaining during an NBA postseason, that's what we all desperately need, because man, if we can't have that TNT show, we got to have something.
Yeah, and just to kind of give you the quote from Draymond. Draymond said, I'm honored with the conversations I've had with Joe Lacob over the years, and him saying to me, when you're done, I could see you coaching this team. When Steve is done, I could see you working with this team. I would love to see that. And Draymond added, it means the world to him, because that means the man who owns the organization I play for watching me play and saying this guy can coach, lead my team. It just did. Yeah. Big time stuff. Not a small deal. And Draymond said, quote, that's a big effing deal. So I know we also like to, get into the whole Well, Draymond, the latest Draymond incident, and he's done, right? Like, it's like, how can the Warriors? Well, you got Joe Lacob. I mean, I think we know how Steve Kerr feels. To hear how Joe Lacob potentially feels, like, I think it's also an indicator as to why cooler heads have been able to prevail even in some pretty crazy and outlandish circumstances.
We also know how Steph feels, by the way. Like, don't undermine that. I mean, I think the biggest tell with last offseason when the Jordan Poole trade came out and Chris Paul came in, and there was a lot of, they sided with Draymond over Poole. I was like, they really sided with Steph. They sided with the most important player in franchise history who would have that guy be his first choice of a teammate, and he wants to keep playing with him. So
yeah. No, absolutely. And look, Draymond's not going anywhere. Steph's not going anywhere. We know Steve Kerr's not going anywhere, at least for the next 2 years. So it becomes, as we were talking about earlier here on the Just Dubs podcast with John Dickinson and Greg Silver, what direction, and I think we all know there's only truly one answer, the Warriors will pick as far as how to proceed through these next couple of years. That leads into our weekly discussion of other players around the league, and players that have either gone out of the playoffs recently, or there's been some kind of rumor linking. Our friend Tim Kawakami of The Athletic wrote his piece with some names, and I mean, we've discussed all of them, I believe, at different points in time. We haven't discussed a lot of Lauri Markkanen. We have discussed Brandon Ingram, who made his list of potential Warriors targets. I know Marcus Thompson of The Athletic put out a list which included Zach LaVine, who we really haven't talked a lot about. Zach LaVine. Maybe he's somebody
makes a lot of money.
And I don't know necessarily if he's the number 2 that you'd want, although his numbers on paper in terms of 3-point shooting and ability to score and like when healthy. And that's where I think the Warriors also have to be a little cognizant of, like, gosh, like, if you're looking to take a risk on somebody that's the primary issue's been health, you have to make sure that player's going to be able to be available moving forward. I mean, you go way back when. I mean, the Warriors bet on Steph Curry's ability to be healthy, and it wound up paying some major dividends when they gave him a 4-year, $44 million contract that people at the time were thinking, why would you do that? This dude can't stay healthy. And he ended up winning a couple of MVPs and a couple of championships on that contract before the Warriors eventually gave him the max and super max paydays that he's more than earned to this point. So I do want to just some of the names, because I do think, we've mentioned a bunch of names. Brandon Ingram is one we've spent some time on, so we don't need to necessarily get into Brandon Ingram. We did talk about Paul George a little bit at the beginning of the offseason when the Clippers went out. I do think he would be a good fit, but I think the issues there, how do they acquire him? I know Tim had said, Tim Kawakami, he believes Brandon Ingram's the most talented player the Warriors could get, attainably get, have the potential to get most attainable.
Yeah, on his Warriors chances for each player, he has Brandon Ingram as not out of the question.
Yes, exactly. And I'm reading that now. And so Lauri Markkanen is one that we really haven't discussed a lot. I mean, Markkanen would fit with Draymond. He would fit with Trace Jackson Davis. He would fit with Kuminga, although you may have to give up Kuminga to get him, just in terms of young talent, going back the other way to Utah in some kind of a deal. He's got one more year at $18 million left on his contract. What are your thoughts on Lauri Markkanen as a name that has come up a lot? Very skilled, great shooter, I mean, it really is a good match for the Warriors in terms of, I think, the regular season, but I also just don't, I just don't see, I don't really see a path to where, like, I just think the Jazz are going to be looking for a lot more than the Warriors can offer if they look to move Lauri Markkanen. And it's tricky too, because his salary hit isn't in the range of 30 to 35, $40 million, which I think makes it even a little bit more difficult, because the Warriors have some big contracts and some younger players, and then they would obviously have to pay Markkanen. So I just think the financial logistics make Markkanen tough, which is why he hasn't been somebody at the forefront of any of my lists, even though I do think his skill set would fit the Warriors beautifully.
You know, sometimes I don't like how much we agree just for the sake of like burning entertainment, but I guess we've spent so much time together over the last
Lauri Markkanen.
8 months. Yeah, right.
No.
We've spent so much time together that there's just going to be this inevitable in sync mentality sometimes. And I was going to say Markkanen's not a player I've ever gotten too much into a deep discussion about, because I just never saw it as all that likely or realistic. I do think as far as fit for his game, I don't think there's any questions about that. I think he'd fit super nicely alongside Draymond and Trace Jackson-Davis and Jonathan Kuminga. His style of play and the ability to shoot would be huge. But Utah is in a very different place organizationally than the Golden State Warriors are. They've been collecting a lot of assets. You'd have to play GM wars with Danny Ainge, which seems like kind of a difficult task and not someone that you're going to just completely rob in a trade. And yeah, then, you know, he's making $18 million next year on the last year of his contract. So then it's like, well, say you can get rid of Wiggins somehow in that. It's like the salaries don't match up.
Nope.
Skill sets don't match up. Like, I think he would.
And why would Utah in their state want Wiggins? Like, to me, they would not want Wiggins, and they wouldn't need Wiggins for the salary. Like, to me, if I'm Utah, I would want Kuminga. I mean, assuming they value Kuminga, I don't know, but like, I think Kuminga, we've talked about, I think Kuminga has the most value, but it's Kuminga at that $7 to $8 million range. And then you're still having to add more to the deal. But if you're Utah, I think Utah would actually want, like, Utah might be the team that's like, yeah, okay, you could have Markkanen. Well, we want Kuminga and Podziemski and TJD. Right. And
exactly.
or we want Kuminga and one of the other three young guys and 2 first-round picks in 26 and 28, unprotected, because we think you're going to suck, Warriors, in 28, in 28 or whatever it is. So, or 28 and 30, unprotected. So I know unprotected picks really hardly exist anymore, but I don't know. I think the Warriors. I think the Jazz would be, it's just not a number talent fit, I guess.
Yeah, I think play style wise would be great. I think it's very, very unlikely that something like that comes to fruition. And therefore, I don't really say much more beyond what I said just now.
And also, I think in fairness to flesh this out, I think you got to look at the other, like, are there other players that the Jazz would want to add to Markkanen's contract? Is there somebody that the Jazz would want? Like, would the Jazz want off of Jordan Clarkson? Would they want? I mean, would the Jazz want off of I don't know, 2 and 29, 2 and 28 for Jordan Clarkson the next couple of years? I mean, probably not. Like, I mean, that's not crazy money for a sixth man of the year type. Would they want off of Colin Sexton and 36 to 37 million over the next couple of years? Like, I don't know, probably not. I mean, maybe they do. Maybe they don't view him as a future piece, but now you're looking at, then maybe you're looking at Wiggins and Kuminga. Like, it just doesn't fit. And Wiggins is under contract longer than these other players for Utah. So I don't even think there's truly an albatross contract for Utah that they would want to get off of that would lead down a path of where the Warriors would get back and get interested in. They just don't have a lot of bad contracts. John Collins, 26.5. Maybe that's the one. I mean, he's got 26.5 next year, 26.5 player option the following year. So John Collins, maybe that's somebody as far as a contract that they'd potentially want to get off of. But again, if we're talking about marketing, that's a lot of money that would have to be going the other way in that kind of a deal. So looking at some of the other names here. As I click back around, Jarrett Allen. We talked a lot about Jarrett Allen on our last podcast, so we don't need to spend a ton of time on Jarrett Allen. I do think it's interesting that Jarrett Allen would be a player that I understand why the Warriors would covet, but what would the acquisition of Jarrett Allen do to Trayce Jackson-Davis's playing time and or future and or I guess you could have them both. Although I feel like they're similar.
But given that Jarrett Allen is not a shooter, then that's kind of tough if you have let's just play the shooting game, because we did this a lot during Dubs OT last season. So let's say you got the two out there at the same time, maybe Jarrett Allen, Trayce Jackson-Davis, or Draymond, unless it's the first quarter. No outside shooting. Steph, yeah. Clay, maybe, which is, that could go either way on a lot of nights. And then Kuminga, going to have a 3-point shot next year? Maybe. Wiggins, Moody could shoot. But, you look at the rest of that roster up and down. Podziemski wasn't a spot-up shooter. I just think, I think Jarrett Allen... I love the lob threat aspect, honestly, because Draymond loves putting those up for Trayce Jackson-Davis, and you're not going to have Chris Paul probably, but, there's a lot of guys that could throw the ball up and get some lob threats. And to go back to Dallas, we've seen what they've done with Lively and Gafford. It's really worked with their guards. But I do think the shooting thing's a real concern.
Yeah, it is. And I think, again, it comes down to Jarrett Allen could help, but I don't think Jarrett Allen could be the only that's not your second best player. And I know we mentioned that last week. That's not, hey, you gave up Kuminga for Jarrett Allen and now and you still don't have your second best player, or just that, Allen would have to be part of 2 or 3. I think different moves. TK mentioned Mikal Bridges. I don't see a fit there. We've talked about DeJounte Murray. Again, also Tyler Hero, he mentioned. We've talked a little bit about Brook Lopez and the 1-year $23 million that are continuing, are on the books. I think the Warriors could look to maybe get in the mix on a year of Brook Lopez at $23 million. He, as a big who can shoot, would add a complementary dynamic, I think, to Draymond and or Kuminga. And he's also a different player than Trayce Jackson-Davis. So I think you could have, starter backup type of a thing going there. Brook Lopez has really improved as he's a much improved over his career defender now to where he is a true threat to be a rim protector in addition to what he does on the offensive end in terms of shooting the three. So I like Brook Lopez, but that 23 number again is high for one more year. And it's, who goes the other way. And that's not the kind of thing where I think Milwaukee's looking at wanting Wiggins for 2 more years beyond what Lopez has at a similar level of money. So I don't truly know the fit in terms of the finances as far as Brook Lopez goes.
Let me ask you about this then, because it's someone deep in that article, and it's someone who is younger than Brook Lopez, making a lot less money than Brook Lopez, and could be complimentary in the sense that can shoot it from the outside, is the Pacers center Jalen Smith.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Not as a second best player, obviously, but that's a piece.
And a younger player, right? He's only 24. He does shoot the 3, which I like. I kind of like what he's developed into. But I don't know that he's necessarily the perfect fit either. Again, it comes down to like, is he somebody $5.4 million player option? So he could decline that. Like, is he somebody, if the Warriors freed up their mid-level exception, they would look to go sign for, 11, 12 million a year, something like that. Again, there's steps that would have to be done to go get Jalen Smith. Like, I think, again, he could be a part of the solution. The other name that I like is Bruce Brown, among the Kawakami names, as far as just a backup jack of all trades, point guard. Like, I love Bruce Brown. But again, he's got a $23 million team option. And so, we'll see what the Raptors look to do. Like, I think that could be a potential salary dump kind of a thing where they're looking to get off that money. But I think he's a really useful player that, is younger than you think at 27. Like, I tend to think of Bruce Brown like he's 33, but he's actually 27. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, he plays older. I just think he plays older in terms of intelligence and smarts and things like that. So again, that's a role player. You
hate Bruce Brown like I hate Lauri Markkanen.
Yeah, I love Bruce Brown. I think he'd be a really good fit, but again, he's not solving your second best player problem either. But I do think he's veteran stability. If you're looking for a backup, they're going to have to find a backup point guard on this team. Like, I don't think Podziemski pencils as a backup point guard. He may pencil as a starting two guard. So I don't know. I think Bruce Brown's somebody that, if you could get him, I think he would be more useful than, say, Moses Moody on the Warriors roster next year.
Yeah, and maybe Moody would get sent to Toronto if the Warriors acquired Bruce Brown. Maybe that'd be part of the package.
Yeah, and I'm also looking at the $23 million team option for next year. So, I mean, could Toronto just not pick that up? Like, I don't know. I mean, that's the other part. Like, could he just be outright maybe a free agent? Although they could pick it up and obviously look to send him somewhere. But I think Bruce Brown is a winning player. I think he's a glue guy. I think could play with any group kind of a player. And so I think he could be a real useful player. A lot of these other names that TK mentioned were kind of in the role player vein. So we don't have to spend a lot of time or really any time on the rest of them at this point. But I think this highlights, and what we were talking about earlier as far as the Dallas model or the Indiana model. I don't think the Warriors are a player away. But that doesn't mean that you just stand pat with what you have either, because I still think that option's worse. So it's look to be creative, look to do some different things. I know you wanted to pay homage to Steph Curry, who did make the third team All-NBA, announced earlier this week, and Brandon Podziemski, who made first team All-Rookie for the 2023-24 season. Some more news there as those All-NBA teams were announced just a few days ago.
Yeah, I mean, just to make 10 All-NBA teams for Steph Curry, sometimes in the middle of it, and with Warrior fans, whether they are older and have been around longer and have suffered through a lot of the bad years of this organization, or people who are a little bit newer to the party, it's all good either way. I think sometimes we just get caught up in the expectations and taking what he does for granted. And especially this last year, just to have him save this team and really carry them through that first stretch of the season when things were not going well at all. To have the sustained level of greatness that he has, 10 All-NBA selections, is incredible. At his Hall of Fame status, future first ballot Hall of Famer, champion winner, all of that. So just another great reminder of the player that he still was this year, even if the team overall underperformed. And then Podziemski, also just really cool for him. I mean, 19th pick of the draft, got a lot of DNPs at Illinois, just kind of shows that ending up in the right situation. And I know, JD, later in the season, we kind of laughed that Podziemski sort of was getting himself on the scapegoat list because his minutes were taking away from minutes that other people wanted to see out of others. But Podziemski, bottom line is, he did a lot of little things. He did a lot of winning plays. Statistically, he was part of a lot more winning lineups. And so just to come into a rookie and be ready like that, I think is really cool. And it should give the Warriors some hope, even though they were just a little bit too young, this young group this year.
Well, and I'm even going to throw Trace Jackson Davis in, who wasn't on the all rookie, what they do first team and second team for
he was a vote shy of the second team.
Yeah, for the rookies. But like Brandon Podziemski, and this is just reality. Like Brandon Podziemski walked onto this Warriors roster and was more productive in his first year than any pick the Warriors have had in recent memory. I mean, like going back to like Harrison
Barnes. Yeah.
Yeah. Like going back to Harrison Barnes, who started day one. Like, so like, this is the most productive first round pick the Warriors have had immediately. More productive than Kuminga in his rookie year, and more productive than Moody in his rookie year. And obviously Wiseman and Looney and, a bunch of other names. So,
almost as good as Anthony Randolph.
Almost as good as Anthony Randolph. Oh my goodness. Anthony Randolph.
Or if we want to talk about your Kings, we could throw in Thomas Robinson.
I've got a bunch of them. There's a
Nick
bunch
Stauskas.
of names. There's a bunch of Kings names for well beyond your time on Earth, my friend. And Warrior names, by the way. They go hand in hand. They've been the same franchise for the most part. On that front. So yeah, Podziemski, nod to him. And the thing I continue to like, but also makes me chuckle about Podziemski, is just the confidence that he has in not only his own game and the ability to grow, but in the confidence that he has in the Warriors. And, the big quote takeaway from Podziemski on the KNBR morning show with Murph and Marcus, it's great. Quote, I think me, Trace, Moses, and Jonathan being together for a whole year, combining with whoever the vets are, I think we have a good chance of winning a championship. Like, okay. All right, Pods. Like, I mean, again, he's got the belief.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather that than not having the belief.
And here's the reality. He's not wrong as long as it's those four and Steph and Draymond and like three other guys that basically make up the top nine that aren't currently on the roster. Like, and two of those three are second and like fifth best players on the team. So you do that, then you get those, and I really agree with Pods.
My little side note on Podziemski, just to kind of close out some of my thoughts on the show. And if you've made it this far, big applause to you. We appreciate you here on Just Dubs. And we'll have some live ones coming up soon.
That's Greg's way of saying we've gone too long, by the way.
What I was going to say is Kyle still likes to bring up to me how much he loved when we had the Harmonic show last day at the regular season, how you brought our buddy Austin Scott on for a little segment and just compared him to Podziemski with his confidence and abilities at his young age.
Yes, I and that comp still stands. Although I'm not sure why Austin still considers that like I was taking a shot, or that it was a negative. But we're just gonna have to agree to disagree on that front. All right, final quick thing I did want to get to: the Klay Thompson Philly rumor. That was via Yahoo Sports. Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports, who is pretty tapped in. Sixers might consider offering Klay a 1-and-1 deal, similar to the Bruce Brown deal, where it was like 20, 25 and 23, or 20, 22 and 23, something like that. The direct quote: the Sixers, source said, took note of Indiana's 2-year splurge for Bruce Brown that then became the biggest salary headed back to Toronto in exchange for Siakam. Veteran wings like Klay Thompson and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope could fall on the Sixers list of targets for similar 1+1 type contracts. So Orlando and Philly, not the first time Philly's been linked, but in terms of potential money that might dip right around that range where I think the Warriors would be comfortable, which is that $23 to $25 million range.
I mean, look, Klay's going to get offers. He's going to get interest. I know he had a pretty terrible final game to the season, but he had a pretty good last 3 months of the regular season as well. So enough to make people think, hey, he still offers something that we could use on an NBA roster and could really come in through a playoff series.
Yeah, so keep an eye on that. I think he's going to get the $25 million. So the Warriors, I think, are going to have to decide whether they're willing to do that, and I think he's going to have to decide whether he would leave if somebody offered him a little bit more than that, and the Warriors didn't as well, which is all still going to be a story coming up here between now and July. All right, that'll do it. Greg, awesome stuff. We'll try to get another one of these. I mean, in the next few days, although we'll probably let this one breathe through the holiday weekend and bump it out. Not too many things time specific. Let everybody know all the different ways.
Play it at your block party.
Yeah, no, Greg, let everybody know all the different ways they can get this. Obviously, the video component, we're going to throw that up on the KNBR YouTube page and all of that. Yeah, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, probably Google and Amazon and other big podcast carriers. And oh yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll tweet out some clips too. Give the people a little snack here and there. Yeah, I've been getting my video editing skills on this week, so we'll see. We'll see if I'm motivated. We'll see how motivated I am. It's been a long week. There's been a lot of stuff going on, so we'll see. I got one last question for you in regards to a big section of the second half of this podcast for you. Is Brucey B going anywhere? Hell no. Hell no. I know. Yeah. We didn't talk about my Nuggets going out. But Michael Malone will have my ass. I still have that drop on the board. Yeah, well, we're gonna need it. We're gonna need it. Well, I don't want to get off on a tangent, so I'm just gonna end it there. We'll talk about it on the next podcast, and maybe get into some of the conference finals as they start to take shape here with Minnesota and Dallas, and obviously Boston, who's in a real good position, up 2-0 as we record this on Indiana. So for Greg, I'm JD. We'll talk to you when we talk to you. KNBR, the sports leader.